Hey, what's going on, everybody? Welcome back. Today, we're going to be going over part 3 of this podcast. We're going to be going over Danny Roddy and Georgi Dinkov's podcast, Generative Energy number 4. Again, this is part 3, so if you want to go back and watch part 1 and 2, we're breaking down the podcast, going over all the interesting topics in that podcast. And today, we're going to continue on. Let's do a brief overview of what we're going to be talking about today, and then we'll get started right away. So, things we're going to be talking about is hunger a sign of good health or a symptom of low thyroid? What's the best way to build muscle while keeping stress hormones in check? Why might some people struggle to raise cholesterol, and what does that mean for metabolism? Should you avoid vitamin E when trying to get rid of stored PUFA? And finally, what's the truth about vitamin A toxicity? All right, let's kick things off with a question that a lot of people wonder about. Is hunger actually a sign that your body needs nutrients? Or could it be a symptom of something deeper, like poor glucose oxidation or low thyroid? This was brought up in Generative Energy number 4, the podcast, when someone asked if an insatiable appetite could lead to an unavoidable weight gain. Georgi had some really interesting insights on this, and we're going to break it down in a way that makes sense. So first off, Georgi pointed out that something really key here is that hunger is generally a good sign. People who have metabolic dysfunction, like diabetics, don't often feel hungry the way a healthy person would. Why? Because hunger usually means your blood glucose has dropped and your body is signaling for more fuel. But here's the interesting part. People with low thyroid function or diabetes don't often experience normal hunger cues because their blood sugar stays artificially elevated due to the high cortisol. So cortisol raises blood sugar by breaking down muscle and other tissue to keep glucose levels up. So if you're in a stressed or hypothyroid state, you might not feel hungry in a normal way because your body's already pumping out glucose from the stress and not from food. Now, the other part of the question was whether it's possible to ignore hunger without causing more stress to the body. And this is where Georgi's answer gets really practical. So if you're truly hungry, you should eat. Hunger itself is not the problem. It's what you eat that matters. He pointed out that weight gain does not automatically just happen because you eat when you're hungry. The real issue is where those calories are actually coming from. If you keep fat intake low, under 15% of daily calories, and focus on sugar and protein, obviously not specifically sugar, but carbs, then weight gain is unlikely. On the other hand, high-fat diets, especially those loaded with PUFAs, can slow your metabolism and promote weight gain, and even in a calorie deficit, which is kind of crazy. So to sum it up, hunger is usually a good sign that your metabolism is actually working. And if you're eating a diet low in fat and rich in protein and sugar, you don't need to fear hunger. But if you're not hungry at all, this could be basically a sign of poor glucose metabolism or thyroid dysfunction. This is something that goes against the typical diet culture mindset of ignoring hunger to lose weight. But in reality, if you support your metabolism with the right foods, your body will regulate itself naturally. All right, so let's move on to the next topic. Hopefully that made a lot of sense. And we're going to be talking about the best way to build muscle while keeping stress hormones like cortisol in check. All right, next up, we're talking about how to build muscle while keeping stress hormones like cortisol in check. This is a big one because so many people assume that the more you exercise, it's always better. But Georgi and Danny had a totally different perspective on this. So the question is, what's the best way to lift weights and recover in a way that actually supports your thyroid and metabolism? So one of the first things that Georgi pointed out is that any weightlifting protocol can be beneficial as long as it is not overly exhausting. The biggest mistake, doing intense CrossFit style workouts that push your body into extreme stress. These kinds of workouts skyrocket cortisol and adrenaline, which can actually work against your metabolism and muscle growth in the long run. So now here's something interesting. Gorillas and chimpanzees have an insane amount of muscles, and they don't even work out. What's their secret? They naturally have low cortisol and high androgen levels, which means their bodies build muscle effortlessly just from basic movements. Some of them are pretty jacked looking. And while we're obviously not gorillas, the key takeaway here is that muscle growth isn't just about lifting weights. It's about keeping stress low and supporting your hormones. So what's the ideal weightlifting approach for a thyroid-friendly metabolism? So here's what Georgi recommends. So he says to keep workouts short, 15 to 30 minutes max. more than that, and you risk triggering excessive cortisol. Listen to your body, and if your muscles are sore the next day, you probably overdid it. This is a sign of excessive stress and poor recovery. Avoid marathon gym sessions. Focus on intensity, not duration. Progesterone and DHEA can help balance cortisol and support muscle growth. And here's a key insight. If you are hypothyroid, exercise might not feel good at all. If working out leaves you drained instead of energized, your thyroid function might not be as strong enough to handle it just yet. So the big key takeaway here is that you don't need to kill yourself in the gym just to build muscle. If your workouts are leaving you exhausted, it's a sign that stress hormones are just way too high. Keep your sessions short, listen to your body, and focus on recovery. And if you are hypothyroid, it might be best to focus on fixing your metabolism first, then gradually introduce exercise when your body can actually handle it. All right, so coming up next, we're diving into cholesterol. Ooh, the boogeyman. If you've been trying to raise your cholesterol for metabolic health but aren't seeing any changes, you're going to want to hear this next one. Let's get into it. All right, so let's talk about cholesterol. We've been told for decades that lowering cholesterol is the key to better health, but what if that's not always the case? There are actually a lot of people struggling with low cholesterol, and the question is, what's the best way to raise it naturally? Now, Georgie and Danny broke down some surprising insights on this one, so let's get into it. First off, why would someone want to raise their cholesterol? Well, cholesterol isn't just some bad guy that clogs arteries. It's actually the backbone of all your steroid hormones like testosterone, DHEA, progesterone, cortisol, obviously in the right amounts. And if you're low in cholesterol, you might struggle with hormone production, energy, and even brain function. So how do you increase it naturally? Let's break it down. Things that lower cholesterol that you might want to actually cut back on: caffeine, aspirin, and niacinamide. All of these can reduce cholesterol levels. If you're taking high doses of these daily, they could be keeping your cholesterol just way too low. Things that raise cholesterol naturally: sugar and saturated fats. These have a huge effect on boosting cholesterol levels. Liver function is obviously key. If eating more sugar and saturated fat doesn't raise your cholesterol, you might have liver issues. So here's why that matters. Your liver is where most of the cholesterol is made. If your cholesterol is low and your diet isn't fixing it, that could be a sign of poor liver function. And here's something else that's pretty fascinating. So vitamin D and calcium may play a huge role in supporting liver function. Georgie even mentioned that repeat believe that deficiency in vitamin D and calcium could actually cause liver issues, not just be a symptom of them. So if you're struggling with low cholesterol, first check if you're taking anything that's lowering it. So like aspirin, caffeine, niacinamide. Then try increasing your sugar and saturated fat intake. This alone helps most people. But if this still isn't working, you might want to look into liver health. Supporting it with vitamin D and calcium could make all the great difference. All right, next up, should you take vitamin E when trying to clear PUFA from your body? There's some controversy around this, and we're going to break it down. All right, let's talk about something that comes up all the time in the bioenergenic space: how to get rid of stored PUFA, polyunsaturated fats. By now, you should know what that is, right? PUFA builds up in your tissues over time, and when they start breaking down, they can cause all sorts of metabolic problems: oxidative stress, inflammation, and even blocking energy production. So if you're trying to get PUFA out of your system, should you avoid vitamin E, since some people claim it could actually preserve PUFA in your tissue? Let's break this one down. So first off, why is PUFA such a big deal? So PUFA is highly unstable and breaks down into toxic byproducts like lipid peroxides and prostaglandins, which drive inflammation. Stored PUFA gets released during stress, fasting, or exercise, causing metabolic slowdowns. Your body can't just burn it off quickly. You have to displace it over time with saturated fat and sugar. Now, here's where vitamin E comes into play. Vitamin E is known for two major effects. It's a powerful antioxidant, which means it helps neutralize PUFA breakdown products. It inhibits lipolysis, which means it reduces the amount of PUFA being released into the bloodstream. So does that mean vitamin E is bad if you're trying to clear PUFA? Not exactly. So Ray Peat actually recommended small amounts of vitamin E to protect against PUFA damage, especially during exercise. He said that 50 IU vitamin E should be enough to neutralize PUFA without interfering with fat loss. Georgi added that around 20 IU is probably a good daily dose to balance protecting your body while still allowing PUFA to be released and burned off. So if you're actively trying to clear PUFA from your body, don't overdo it with vitamin E, but don't avoid it entirely either. The best approach is to use longer chain saturated fats like stearic acid and palmitic acid from beef fat, butter, etc. to replace PUFA in your tissues. Keep vitamin E low to moderate, around 20 to 50 IU seems to be the sweet spot. And if you're exercising, a little vitamin E can protect you from PUFA oxidation without blocking fat loss. All right, let's move on. We got the next up. We're tackling vitamin A toxicity. Is it real or is it just another misunderstood nutrient? We're moving on to the last section of this breakdown. I think we're going to have a part 4 as well. This is part 3, analyzing generative energy number 4. Let me know what you guys thinking so far, and yeah, let's move on. So, all right, now let's get on to something that's been weirdly controversial lately, vitamin A toxicity. A lot of people online are talking about how vitamin A is actually toxic and that it builds up in the body, wrecks metabolism, and that we should all be avoiding it. But what's the truth here? Is vitamin A actually dangerous, or is it just another misunderstood nutrient? First, let's start with what vitamin A actually does in your body. It's essential for healthy skin, eyesight, immune function, and steroid hormone production. It protects against estrogen dominance, which is why it's one of the core nutrients that Ray Peat always talked about. It's a key player in anti-inflammatory processes, which means it helps lower oxidative stress. So where does this whole vitamin A toxicity fear actually come from? The idea mainly comes from beta carotene buildup, which isn't even true vitamin A. Beta carotene needs to be converted into retinol, the active form, and that conversion isn't very efficient. If you eat too much beta carotene, it can slow thyroid function and show up as orange calluses on the skin. That's not vitamin A toxicity, that's just excess carotenoids. True vitamin A toxicity is rare and happens at insanely high doses, think about hundreds of thousands of IU daily for extended periods of time. Georgi even mentioned that he's never seen a real case of vitamin A toxicity in all the people he's worked with. In fact, there are studies showing that vitamin A in high doses, up to 400,000 IU daily, had no toxic effect when combined with vitamin E. The real problem is most people today are actually deficient in vitamin A, not toxic. Skin issues like eczema, dandruff, or dermatitis, that's often a sign of vitamin A deficiency. Vitamin A and vitamin E together actually work to counteract estrogen excess and support metabolism. So, unless you're eating pounds of liver every day or supplementing massive doses without any vitamin E, you're probably not going to have a problem. The best approach is to get vitamin A from real food like liver, eggs, and dairy. Pair it with vitamin E to prevent any oxidation risks, and don't fall for the fear mongering around it. Vitamin A is one of the most powerful protective nutrients when used correctly. All right, well, that concludes this episode. This is part 3, going over generative energy number 4. There's a lot more to go over. So far, it seems like a few of you are actually enjoying these. It's still debatable whether I'm going to be doing them live like this or just have the AI voice talk for me, which honestly was a lot easier, but I guess let's get some more feedback and see what you all think. I probably should have put this in the beginning of the video because most people probably don't make it to the end. That ends this, and hopefully we'll see you in the next episode. See ya.